Hi, this is Nicholas Bell with IONCINEMA, here to review The Courier, the sophomore film directed by Dominic Cooke, which premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival when it was known as the name Ironbark. It is being released courtesy of Roadside Attractions, March 19th, 2021. So of course this is based on a true story in capital letters film, which goes back to the early 1960s when we were in a global nuclear crisis. It opens with Nikita Khrushchev barking orders at his minions in August of 1960 in Moscow. And there we are introduced to Oleg Penkovsky, who is part of the GRU, part of the Khrushchev's secret artillery unit, played by Merab Ninidze, a Georgian actor who's been in a ton of stuff, including Jupiter's Moon recently from Cornell Bundruxo, the upcoming Tom Clancy's Without Remorse, etc., etc. He takes it upon himself to reach out to an American he finds on the streets of Moscow and ask them to smuggle a letter into the American embassy, which spurs the CIA, who's represented by Rachel Brosnahan, to come to London to meet with MI6, Dickie Franks, played by Angus Wright. And they discover that the Russians are working on nuclear armaments that are going to be an imminent threat to the rest of the world. So they decide to recruit a non-government person that will go unsuspected going to Moscow. So they land on a man named Greville Wynn, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who's this kind of boring, alcoholic salesman who travels a lot to Eastern Europe, and they kind of fool him into going over to Moscow, where he makes contact with Penkovsky, who is a man who he grows to have some friendship for, which is what the dramatic catalyst of the third act is all about. So he ends up being pigeonholed into going back and forth and transporting these messages that end up being what allows the U.S. to foil the Russians in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this is all around the time, in between Bay of Pigs and the foiling of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But instead of really kind of giving any kind of overview about that, we spend more time about Cumberbatch as a man who once cheated on his wife, poor Jessie Buckley in a terrible wig that I think they're trying to make look like Patricia Neal, is this role of the jealous housewife who thinks that his clandestine behavior is because of another affair with a woman. So there's a lot of cliche dramatic tension around that. Cumberbatch, we've seen him in these espionage thrillers before, and of course the celebrated, if somewhat problematic, The Imitation Game, where he played Alan Turing, to even the recent Mauritanian, where he's kind of a similar inert persona on a different kind of, on a different end of the law enforcement spectrum, if you will. However, if you like period espionage films, if history at all interests you, of course you'll want to take a look, although I think that history buffs will be kind of disappointed in this, as we learn about Greville Wynn and his involvement in foiling the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think Oleg Penkovsky is actually the more interesting character, which there are other films. Every now and then we go through a slew of films revisiting certain periods, and about 20 years ago we had a slapstick comedy called Company Man, which is about the Bay of Pigs, which is around the same time as 13 Days, which is more an in-depth look at JFK's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis, also starring Kevin Costner, Bruce Greenwood as JFK. It was lensed by Sean Bobbitt, Steve McQueen's cinematographer, who of course shot the excellent Judas and the Black Messiah, recently released. The period, it looks just fine as a period piece. Dominic Cooke's last film was On Chesil Beach with Saoirse Ronan, which came out in 2017. And this very much feels like, again, kind of like that film, a familiar narrative that is very squarely packaged. It was written by Tom O'Connor, who also wrote The Hitman's Bodyguard. So I think the biggest surprise is that this is a 180 from the screenwriter's standpoint. Overall, I would give The Courier 2.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you.
Hey, this is Tariq from IONCINEMA.com. If you want to support us, subscribe below. For For more reviews, interviews, film festival coverage from Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, you want to check out these guys on this side.